Just a chat, youth's concerns and aspirations ready to lead. This is episode 7, the concluding episode of our series on Youth at the Crossroads series. In this concluding webinar of the series, we turn our focus to the voices that have carried us through each conversation, those of youth themselves. Rachel, why don't you give us a start? Throughout this series, we've been most interested, of course, in the extent to which you as young people have been affected by rapid change. Do you want to talk at all about your own personal experience in terms of being confronted by change over the course of the last couple of years?
Um, yeah, definitely. So I think whether it's economic or AI or sometimes even personal changes, COVID, I think COVID kind of marked an area where just the changes started coming. And to quote a popular song, they did not stop coming. And I guess what it came down to was the reason we got this chat together was how resilient can you be and how do you react to that when you start to notice that happening. For me, it was, I think similarly as many people on this panel, it was you have to bring your best to the table and bring whatever skills you have to bear in order to deal with that. And I think that for me, that ended up in creating a business that would, help people improve their personal wellness, improve their overall productivity with AI. And that was a double-sided sword for me. It was something that helped me to take a hold of my own future and change things for myself. And it was a way to make the world a better place for other people through AI. And so I think for me, that was the biggest piece of adapting to the challenges and changes that came out. Um, and yeah, that's what I would say there.
Okay, I think that perspective is shared to some extent, some nuances among all of you. But I've got an additional question before I shift to Vivek, who I'll ask next. As you look ahead, are you optimistic about Canada's future and what gives you that sense of hope or hesitation? I'm trying to prompt your personal outlook and whether you have a national vision.
Yeah, so this panel's been really interesting in that regard, and I think it's definitely boosted my hopefulness in general about the future of Canada to hear other people's opinions and see what other people think. I'm very hopeful about, I would say, this sense of young people not being afraid to break a few eggs, being willing to jump out and start doing things, even if they might not be the perfect thing. But yeah, very optimistic about that. I would say maybe a little bit hesitant about the current economic state exactly. But I think that if young people keep on going the way that they're going, if they're persistent and they continue to show the resilience that's been shown on this panel, and that I kind of maybe it's Battermeinhof phenomenon where I've seen it in this panel now and I'm seeing it more places that I go out. But I think if young people keep on doing that, we have a better future going ahead.
Okay, Vivek, what's your perspective? Are you optimistic, pessimistic? What's your vision of the future and for Canada?
Well, I would say, Perry, that the COVID pandemic definitely marked a great changing point in many of our lives. Simply, I guess the nature of how our society works changed quite a bit, and it's you can definitely see that there's a vibe shift from what came before in the 2010s. So there is a large amount of pessimism these days that you can easily fall into. And with the world rapidly changing with the rise of things like artificial intelligence and different like narratives that are being propagated throughout, like the climate crisis and other things that are based in reality, but can be a little bit overblown at times. I think that it's easy to be fearful, but it's much stronger and better to confront these challenges with the information and being prepared for what's coming. So I think it's better to have a positive outlook, even though some changes may seem a little bit unsettling. It's good to approach with a positive mentality because ultimately it is the only thing that we can do rather than get bogged down in all the negatives of what's happening. So, with that, I would prescribe Canadians to have more of a positive mindset about things that are happening. And instead of being bogged down in the negatives, they should take the approach that, okay, these changes are occurring. How can we positively approach them and do positive things with what is being developed? So I think that's the approach that should be taken. That's just my point of view.
Before I go on to Marty and then Emerson, you have your own network with the Youth Policy Council. Are those in your network? Are those that you affiliated generally positive about the future, or are they approaching policy development from a negative perspective?
I would say that some people might be inspired from a negative point of view in that they'll be like, okay, well, what is currently happening is not good, so we need to inspire change. But I would say that the goal there is to shift from something negative to going towards something positive. So, in a sense, one could be like, negativity provides the basis to go towards a more positive future, where because you want to change something. So in that sense, I would say that there might be some people who view the current whatever is happening in the policy space as negative and want to inspire positive change.
Well, you as a change agent and one of the founders of YPC are clearly draw people in, whether they have a positive or negative perspective, that's a place to help make change. Marty, or Michael, what about your perspective?
Yeah, I see. I'm optimistic about the change. And one of the main reasons why is, the youth, they're uprising, not just, in Canada, but especially in indigenous communities. A lot of youth are starting to step up to the plate and, start to question a lot of things that have been happening in the past. And, instead of focusing on the negatives, we're focusing on the positives and how we can make these negatives into positives and start to change the landscape of how we do things in a good way, in a way that will affect the next 7 generations in a positive way. I think it's important that we start to really start to listen to the youth in Canada because with change it comes, being able to adapt and throughout, all the years of Canada we've had to adapt. And if we stop and change and adapt, they're kind of the same thing. They come with each other. If we're not adapting, then we're not going to be able to change. So I feel like I'm optimistic because of the youth, this panel. It really, motivates myself as well, especially some of the great thoughts that they have and the perspectives they have. It's very interesting, and I'm optimistic about Canada and the change, especially with the youth.
Well, thanks, Marty. I mean, that's particularly heartening from you, given that the frequency with which we hear of the difficulties that you and your culture have faced over time and even today. So the fact that optimism is reigning is heartening to hear. Emerson, your perspective.
Great, thank you. Um, I'm in the middle on it. I would even lean a little bit towards pessimism. I think so. First, I'd say I think that the conversations over the past months have been excellent, and I'm really heartened by the ambition of young people in Canada and that young people want change, and that a lot of the conversation has focused on the economy rather than social issues or climate activism. I think that's been really good to see, and it's been an eye opener for me that across probably uh, political stripes, this is something that young people really care about. I think the issue is government at the moment. That we have a government that cannot build, that is probably not going to build, that is where there's probably not going to be a change in government for quite some time because Canadians are pretty complacent people, and where the U.S. issue is going to keep coming up as a way to, as you had talked about earlier, Perry, in terms of fear-based politics, to scare people away from change. So until young people are engaged enough to and old enough to shift government, I think we're going to have a really big challenge. So that is that's my concern overall. So and I say this. I mean, I didn't share this in the past sort of conversations. I wrote a lot of the current government policy. After I moved back to Canada, Mark Carney reached out, and I wrote a lot of the stuff in terms of one single economy, critical projects going forward, internal trade barriers. And my sort of concern is that there's not going to be delivery of projects, and Canadians don't care enough to actually change. We're again very complacent. So some of the most complacent people in the world, unfortunately. So I really hope that the people on this call, that the young people on this call want to change government and be radical going forward. But I just wonder how long is that going to take? And it could take 5 years, 10 years, more than that, because we have to push against very ingrained, complacent Canadian attitudes. So those are my overall perspectives. Great on young people in this call. In terms of the broader population, I'm not optimistic.
Well, you've zeroed on one specific issue, so I'm going to pose the next question directly to you, and you can carry on. And that is, if you could take the lead on one challenge facing Canada today, and it sounds like you've had a lead when you were engaged to do policy work, but if you could take on one challenge facing Canada today, whether it be social, economic, environmental, or otherwise, sounds like it's government, but maybe that's everything. So you might want to be more specific. What would that one challenge be?
It would be reducing permitting times and approval times significantly on projects, so that we do the same thing like the States with MP materials and these big critical minerals mines, and say we're going to permit, we're going to give you your permits to build in 2 months or 6 months tops, kind of thing, versus 7 years or 14 years before something can get built. I think that, and that would be government saying, okay, local community engagement is important or climate is important, but we're going to work through these things extremely quickly and build. That's obviously what the government says right now, but it's not going to happen unless the federal government says this is a national emergency, and we will fight the provinces to the point that we take them to the Supreme Court. That is a kind of approach that I want to see in the future, and until that kind of radicalism and strength is there, it's going to be same old.
Well, whether it requires radical action, it certainly isn't just a resurgence, it's a recognition of Canada's economic potential, which seems to have been denied. And we hear good words. And whether or not we'll get pipelines, whether we'll get northern economic development in mining, whether or not we'll get any attention to the economy when a former party, now the current party, has said that the economy takes care of itself.
I have a really quick question for Emerson. Emerson, are you suggesting that there's a social element of change to this? Is that entirely governmental? What drives what you were talking about? Because I don't disagree.
I mean, I'm encouraged by young people in Canada that just want change and want the economy to be better. That's what I'm encouraged by. And that's been the wonderful thing about these calls over the past 2 months. I've come away with a huge amount of hope in that regard. I am not hopeful about older generations, because we care more about being liked by other countries and by the status quo than we do about change. So I'm hopeful, for 10 years from now, but that's just a long time from now.
Thanks for the clarification. Thanks for bringing that point out, Rachel. But go ahead. What issue would you take on?
I think the reason that I asked is because, I would say, like I said, I don't disagree with anything Emerson said. It's a good point. As a millennial, I've seen a lot of drive for social change across the course of my life, and it can lead to navel gazing and inaction, and a lot of the times even a placebo effect, where people feel like because they want something, because they're saying something or talking about socially changing things, they've done something, but there was no tangible output to it. And so one of the exciting things about this panel, and one of the things that I see more in young people, that I see in myself, is if the government isn't doing what I want it to do, go out and find a way to do it myself. So, okay, I want to see a better AI industry. And to Emerson's point, the boomers are booming. They are not doing anything with the government that's going to help me to have a future for myself in 10 years. I can't rely on the government to make sure that I'm going to be able to own a house, have a family, have a life that I will envision for myself in the next 10 years. I'm going to have to go out and make it. I'm going to have to, and slightly to Emerson's point, the government in some ways can stop you from doing that with regulations and timing, depending on the industry that you're going into. Luckily for us, AI is still kind of like the Wild West, and you can kind of just go out and do things in a lot of ways, and they haven't been regulated yet. So for me, that's a very positive. That's a very positive output. And so I guess for me, I would kind of say private market is where I look to when I can't, in a very youthfully optimistic way. Private market is where I look when I can't see those changes in the government, and then I kind of hope that you can lead the finances, lead the country and the economy that way. If while people like Emerson are doing their best, and while people like you, Perry, are bringing these panels together to stimulate that change, kind of work on it in a multi-pronged approach. So I guess that's my perspective. And I guess also putting feet to your hope. Hope is the kind of thing that you have to hope against hope sometimes. You need it the most when things look the worst. And I like that Emerson's idea kind of brings in this informed hope. Things are a little bit bleak. Things are not looking great for the future. And so in the face of that, you're like, okay, I'm going to pick a future, pick a star that I'm going to run towards. I know it's dark, but if I keep running towards that one hopeful end, we get enough people running towards their stars, we're going to get the change that we're looking for, hopefully.
Okay, so you've echoed, by the way, I will extend an invitation to you for AI and small business when we launch the next series. It sounds like you've got something passionate to share there. Michael, if there was any one issue that you wanted to tackle, what would that issue be?
Yeah, this will, directly tie into what I'm doing now. So, the challenge I would lead on, what I'm leading on today, is energy sovereignty as well as indigenous leadership. This is not just a technical or environmental issue. It's deeply tied to economic opportunity as well as environmental preservation. Too many indigenous communities are still reliant on diesel and external energy sources, not only indigenous communities, but a lot of communities in Canada. And these things are expensive, polluting, and they don't really align, especially with indigenous people, our values as caretakers of the land. At Frog Lake, I have the honor of leading solar feasibility studies, overseeing solar installations on our high school. Right now I'm supporting a walking path with solar lighting to develop and promote wellness in our community. I'm working on energy efficiency retrofits, electrical vehicle infrastructure, and hemp-based building materials. All of which connect the clean energy to community wellness, economic development, and indigenous innovation. And when we're working on these projects as well, it's, keeping it holistic and as well as keeping the economic leakage to a minimum. So, all these projects connect to each other and work with each other. Clean energy, is about so much more than emissions, about self-determination. It's about young people in our nations being able to build careers that support their community's needs and protect the earth while you're at it. If we invest in more clean energy projects, indigenous-led clean energy projects, we can address climate change and support nation rebuilding at the same time. So those would really, some of the things that I would lead on and what I'm leading on right now in our nation.
Well, if I have any one project, it would be to clone you. So thanks, Michael. Vivek, your turn.
Well, I want to say, Perry, that I think I've said this throughout many different webinars, but my area of the greatest concern is the economy, because I find that is the economy plus technology, I would say, because technology, they're inextricably linked. With AI changing and shifting the economy rapidly, and the energy sector, while it's always important, gaining more importance than ever in order to power the future of artificial intelligence. I think that this is one of the biggest issues. I would say that social issues, while they persist, um, they do not occupy my mind most of the time, but they are still there. Uh, I would say that the economy is very real, as to like draw upon a point that Rachel made, but to a more relevant version for me as a Gen Z, I would say that going into the current economy, it's very expensive. It's you can hardly buy a home for most income levels, uh, and many of the things that were once pretty affordable to the boomers or the Gen X generation, they're no longer. as much of they're no longer in the reach of many people these days. So I wanted to focus on that, and I'd say that the way that I wanted to focus on that was I'm very interested within regards to the policy side of things, but I'm also very interested in the energy side of things, and the private industry. And I think that there is a lot of opportunity for collaboration there. I think that I think that a lot of governments these days are moving towards collaborating with private business by creating grants and guiding national infrastructure projects to develop things like data centers and AI infrastructure. And I think that that is a positive development, the cooperation between the governments and the private industry in order to develop large scale technologies. I would say that it is important to have a strong regulatory framework here that is not going to suppress innovation, but make sure that the innovation is useful for the majority of Canadians, um, because there's a tendency for these technologies to benefit the creators to a large extent, but it may also leave behind a large section of the population if we don't properly approach them. So I think that, yeah, the regulatory framework that we approach these technologies with, it largely correlates to the economy as well. And improving the economic condition is largely bolstered by the development of these technologies as that increases efficiency and productivity. That's just my take on it, though.
Well, I mean, there's a general consensus that economic interests are prevalent, at least among the youth that we've collected here in an advisory capacity. And I'm a little surprised because there are those that are sort of waiting for the handoff, the intergenerational transfer of trillions of dollars from one generation to the next without a heavy wealth transfer tax in Canada. And many may be just sitting down and just waiting for a future that will be a hand-me-down. And then there are others that have been victims that feel it's hopeless and there is no future. And then we've got you all. Uh, so it's apparent that we do have youth in Canada with a perspective that they can make a difference, and that while there's not grounds to be hopeless, but there's grounds to take initiative, to find hope, and to do something differently. So my next question is sort of a lead off the last one, which is Canada is said to be in decline by many, with the national debt, as was pointed out by Yitong on the chat and Jeff. If Canada is in decline, uh, but it's also posed for resurgence or reinvention. Emerson cited some of the things that need to be done. What does a resurgence of Canada look like to you? I'm going to start off again with you, Emerson, simply because you've sort of echoed what you feel are some of the initiatives that are called for in order to trigger and demonstrate this resurgence. So why don't you kick this question off?
Sure. So again, I think it would come back at the top to government policy and deregulating as much as possible to build, 10 to 15 huge projects with speed, pipelines, critical minerals projects across the entire value chain there, from mines all the way to magnet production, big data centers, et cetera, to do that as quickly as possible. Pension funds playing a big role in that. And I do think that is something that's happening right now, as our great Canadian pension funds are being mandated to spend more in Canada, but to have government and pension funds help to fund that. So that's the first piece, is lots of gigantic projects with very fast approvals. The second piece, I would say, is I hope that we can become like Israel, in that in the past, the Labor government used to be the government in power. And then Netanyahu came in and liberalized the country, and now it's a conservative country. I really hope, and I genuinely don't want to become too political on this, but I hope that the damage that has been done over the last 10 years and maybe 15 years overall, and the ambition of thoughtful young Canadians that want change, means that that Canada becomes known as a conservative country over a multi-decade period, in the same way that Israel is now a firmly conservative country. I hope that that is part of the future of Canada and is the trade-off for all this damage done over the past 10 plus years. And the final piece when it comes to resurgence is, I think we need stronger partnership with the US. because of overarching China-US competition. That there's more partnership with the US on defense, on critical minerals, technology, etc., and that we build in partnership with the Americans, and we become more American in terms of our demeanor. I think we have to become more assertive as Canadians because we're entering more of a dog-eat-dog world. And even though we're not dog-eat-dog people as Canadians, we need to become a bit more like that. So those would be the three things: is lots of mega projects with with national and foreign investment, spurring that, and fast permits, becoming a genuinely long-term conservative country, and third, more partnership with the U.S.
You certainly heard us echo the view of Fortress North America versus Fortress America and having leadership that would be committed to doing the bridging rather than the running away. But I'll leave that aside for other discussions. Michael, I'm going to call on you. Maybe it's a bit of a surprise to call on you next, but you've echoed some of what Emerson had to say. What projects, what do you think we need to do in order to see this resurgent? What would it look like?
Yeah, a resurgence of Canada to me would look like Indigenous people at the center of national renewal. Not on the sidelines like we have been for, centuries, generations now. It's a Canada where First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people are not only acknowledged for their history, but also respected for their leadership in shaping a sustainable future and a future where we're protecting our Mother Earth so that the next seven generations get to see this beautiful Mother Earth that we all get to, live in each and every day. That resurgent means investing in indigenous clean energy and traditional knowledge systems and things like land-based education. Because when we need to really learn about, the land and, how important it is. And when you get to learn about the land and, what it can do for us, you want to protect it more. It also looks like Indigenous youth leading things like business, creating climate solutions, and restoring our language and our culture, which is, at a very high decline for these past few generations. I think it's also about replacing extractive models with regenerative ones, economic systems that give back more than they take. And resurgent also means rebuilding relationships between people, communities, and the land. And it starts with truth telling and reparations, but it also includes reimagining how Canada works in, things that were talked about today in policy. I know a few weeks ago we're talking about things like education and as well as now more than ever energy, so that it reflects the diversity and the strength of all its people. I see resurgence every day in the work we do in Frog Lake, and not just in my Indigenous community, but throughout all of Canada in their Indigenous communities. And I believe that if Canada listens and learns, it can rise stronger and more unified instead of being so, you know, um, everyone against each other. We're stronger together, and it's, that old tactic of conquer and divide. And and now is more than ever, it's important that we unify all communities within Canada.
So unified economic development and environmental respect seems to be a pretty good combination with indigenous population taking a leadership instead of a sideline role. Thank you. Vivek, you're next, and we'll wrap up with Rachel.
Well, Perry, I think that it's important to focus on projects that are related to the reindustrialization of the economy, because I think that one of the great things that we as Canadians have missed out on in the past many decades was that we let a lot of our industry go overseas, and that weakened and hollowed out the middle classes, which led to growth in the financial sector. As you can see, the top five, well, I believe the top five companies by market capitalization in Canada are literally the banks. Whereas if you look at the United States economy, they're dominated by the technology sector. This shows a great difference between the Canadian model of development and the American model of development. The Canadian one is largely built off of speculating on assets, while the American one also does. Don't get me wrong, the financial sector is huge there, but they also have a very strong and abundant technology sector that promotes innovation whereas the Canadian model is largely very bureaucratic and it doesn't promote any real change of the economy that's positive. It is mostly stuck in giving bureaucrats in the government a large amount of power and money and growth in the bureaucracy, whereas there is no, and like I would say, there's also like the whole real estate bubble. That was also a huge part of the growth of the Canadian economy in the past decade or two. Um, and also the oil and gas sector, but that has largely not been prioritized by the government in the past 10 years at least. So I would say that there needs to be more of a emphasis on building things in Canada rather than just speculating on property and financialization of the economy and growth in the banking sector and property speculation. I think that we need to focus on building things that and technology. I think that's imperative that the government is focused on industrial projects now more than just building houses and that kind of like service sector a mentality that was carried out before. I think it's important that we focus on building hard things that correlate with energy, that correlate with artificial intelligence. I know, for instance, the United States is at the forefront of this, building things like artificial intelligence factories, building AI factories would largely boost productivity and promote innovation. We don't have that kind of investment by the government to large scale projects like that. I think it's important the government focuses on that kind of thing.
Well, the government focus on building the welfare state has been pretty well the focus for the last several generations, but it sounds like the next generation is saying it's time to grow up. Rachel, your turn.
While I would very much align with Emerson and Vivek initially on something like the economy and some of the things they've said, even Marty talking about energy, because we need a better national energy conversation to be sure. And introduction of conversation is kind of better than what we have right now. I think I want to double click on one of the points that Emerson made, which is the idea of having a stronger, conservative national identity over time and what that would look like. And so it seems to me that Canada is very much defined at this point in time by what we are not, who we are not, and a bunch of other countries on the international scale, whether it's America or China or the EU for, healthcare policy or pandemic policy or international trade, being afraid of America, elbows up movement, etc. And if you take the Israel example, Israel really doubled down and looked to themselves. They said, "Who are we? We're great with tech. We are a tech center. We are a finance center. We are great with producing food in the middle of the desert." And they developed the things that were very natural to them and the resources that they had. Canada has so many of those things. Yogi made a really great point about the national debt and how resources might be one of the only ways that we have left to us in developing them to ensure that we can pay off that debt. But I think the underlying problem that we have right now, and the barrier to that, is actually a bunch of fractured cultural identity right now. And that makes it very easy to swing politics to individual cultural identity groups and away from things that will really affect the 2, 5, 10-year distant future of the country. And so I think that kind of away, even though I would probably have said the economic policy off the bat, as a secondary point, moving away from all of those cultural disparities and kind of bringing Canada back to a place where, hey, our identity is true north, strong, and free. Whoever you are, wherever you came from, now you're in Canada, and our goal is to make this the best Canada that we have for all of us, not your individual group, not your individual age group or your identity group or your cultural group, but for all of us. And so kind of putting aside that fracture and coming together with a bit more cultural identity is how I think we can accomplish that. And with that in place, then you don't have the sort of cultural lobbying that takes place there. And you can then have a stable platform among your population to start looking at the economics or or technology or energy and all of those things.
Okay, the next question, I'll start out with you, Rachel, because I know you've already touched on it, and that is AI is accelerating change across all sectors. And I'll pause there because it's almost a tsunami when I look at the trillions of dollars that have now been achieved, not by IBM, but by all these new players, NVIDIA, namely, providing chips for an AI industry. This is a tsunami, and it's sweeping the globe. Do you feel prepared? Are you getting prepared to use AI as a tool in your life, education, or career? And I know, Rachel, where you're going to start. So if each will be brief on this, then I'll get to the wrap-up question. But Rachel, where do you see AI in your life?
A very exciting future for me, developing on the cutting edge of it. I do think you would be surprised by how much of AI right now is not touching the public sector or the government sector in a way that's meaningful. A lot of AI development is by private sector for private sector or maybe for businesses and companies. I think that needs to change. I think that the benefits shouldn't be limited to large companies or just the affordable ones. I think it's something that needs to touch everybody's lives, and that means bringing it into schools, getting into government in ways that are ethical and fast and affordable.
Michael, your turn. Where do you see AI in your future?
I think AI is definitely a very interesting topic, and I see AI as a powerful tool. But like any tool, its value depends on how we use it. I'm still, learning about AI and getting prepared to use AI and things like energy systems, project management, and environmental data analysis. I'm interested in, how AI can support things like optimizing energy use, forecasting things like solar output, and monitoring ecosystems in ways that complement traditional land knowledge. But, I also approach AI with caution. Indigenous knowledge systems are holistic, relational, and grounded in lived experiences, and that they can't be, replicated by algorithms. So I believe we need to, approach AI in ways that respect our values and centers ethical use. That means, making sure indigenous people are not only users of AIs, but creators, critics, and leaders in its development as well. In my work, I see the potential for AI to enhance our ability to manage resources, track progress, and make strategic decisions when needed. But we have to ensure it doesn't further disconnect us from the land or each other. We need to balance things, just like all things in life. And I also believe that, AI, it uses a lot of energy as well from, some of the things I've read online. And I think we need to make sure that if we're really going to transition to AI and a lot of things that we do every day, we need to make sure that our energy is ready for that as well.
Okay, thank you. There's an element of caution there and an element of making sure that our values are respected. Go ahead, Emerson, you're next.
I would just echo what was said in the previous sessions, where I thought we had a good conversation about using AI as a way to learn more quickly rather than to do our thinking for us. And if Canadians can use this as a tool to expedite learning, and if we can use this as a way to expedite learning within classrooms, as challenging as that is, then I think that's really positive. It's about using it as a tool to be more ambitious rather than to use it as a crutch for our thinking. That's my sort of thought on it.
Yeah, I actually had this very interesting scenario the other day where we used ChatGPT for, so we were trying to figure out a problem that we like a real world problem. And one of the things I found that was very interesting was ChatGPT has this new thing called uh, deep analysis, I believe that's what it was called, or deep thinking.
Yeah.
So what we did was we input our entire scenario that, okay, we're in this situation, we're in yada, 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 here are all the things that happened, and here's all the things that we think we can do. What do you think that we should do? And so it basically came up with like a 20-page long report about, okay, here's how you can take an action plan to do this, this, this. And it actually gave us some ideas that we didn't think about either. So we thought that, okay, well, you can also, while you shouldn't use ChatGPT as a crutch for your thinking, because it has some pre-generated ideas and conceived notions about the world that were programmed into it. I think that can also definitely aid in your thinking, which in certain cases, if you don't have the time to actively think about things, you can use it to increase your efficiency and productivity. but you shouldn't become overly reliant on it because that dulls your own ability to think about things. So I think it's something that we should be cautious about using, but I think that using it judiciously will help maintain good leadership as well. Now, one of the things that I think that is also important about AI use is that the programming behind the AI models is important as well, because there are certain restricted topics, there's certain things that you can't talk about, and that is an example of limiting thinking. I think it's important that the models that we use are programmed to such an extent that they don't limit our thinking in certain fields, but I know that's hard to do as well. And that's my take on it. I think that AI should be used by everyone, um, in order to understand what's coming, but also understand the risks and liabilities that come with using it. It's going to be used to profile people in massive amounts for sure.
Those are great points. I do have to chuck this in because, to your point, uh, I've worked extensively with AI. I've coded apps myself, learned how to code them, and I think to develop that to this point, the dangers of AI are not clear. For example, AI has confirmation bias. If you put in information that is incorrect, it can confirm, yes, that is totally correct. This is the way that you should be thinking about things. This is correct possible economic policy. And it doesn't know if it's giving you the incorrect information. And I think that that is one of the big hidden dangers that you have to also check for. And it's why I'm very much in favor of making sure that AI, well, it's very powerful, is delivered ethically to populations. Because if you aren't an expert and you don't know it's wrong, and ChatGPT gives you a 20-page document full of information that looks and sounds really great, and neither of you are able to identify the problems. Whereas someone like Emerson, maybe as a policy expert, is like, wait a second, this isn't a real policy. That never happened. It can be a very small, hidden, but terrible flaw. And the other thing I want to point out is that it's doing that to everybody. So where you are putting that information in, it's kind of feeding this. AI doesn't think. It just trains gigantic language models on speech that sounds and looks right, and then delivers it back to you. And there are quality models, but those always have flaws. To your point, you pointed this out. So I just do want to check in that great thinking tool, great processing tool. I would say that for anything that requires expertise, though, I would caution a lot of care before you, a lot of care in how you approach those answers, even with the deep ones.
The founder of DeepMind has recently written a book called, I think it's called The Coming Chaos. It sits by my bedside. I'm deep into it now. And he echoes your perspective, Rachel. In fact, his concern ultimately is the importance of containment, of recognizing as we approach superintelligence and the capacity of AI to do as much as it's capable of doing, along with what's happening. Yeah, there we are. That's the book. Thank you. That's the one I'm reading right now. It's worth taking a look at because it's a sober assessment of where superintelligence is taking us and the importance and whether or not we can actually achieve the degrees of containment that are called for. But we'll be dealing with that in the next series, and you're all invited to next Thursday. We're now into wrap up. This series has been about youth. It's certainly been focused on change. We've highlighted the relevance of probably more impact on the economy. We've skirted because it didn't appear to be that interesting. The DEI, the social engineering that seemed to dominate discussion up until the last year or so. So my wrap-up question is about leadership and change, and whether you personally feel you're playing a role in bringing about change, or whether you're just coasting. I'm going to start out with Rachel, just because I was with Rachel in the last question. She's all warmed up. So Rachel, why don't you talk a little bit about your own personal role as you see the future and what role you can play in leadership as you aspire or otherwise?
I think for me right now, it's a largely educational role because I work on the front lines of AI. It's something that I love. I love technology. I have a very interdisciplinary background in engineering, a bit of political science, bit of math, other things, sports. And so, as I alluded to earlier, it's very interesting to watch the private sector and the concentration of resources in the private sector sort of lead AI towards solutions that are optimized for the private sector. For me, the leadership element and the education element come together in terms of making sure that, like I said, whether it's children or government or people, anyone who wants to use AI and take advantage of the massive amount of power that's available through AI, have the ability to access it in a way that's safe, that preempts certain concerns, and that makes their lives better. To me, that's what ethical leadership is about. It's about taking things and making people's lives better with it. It's about, if you see that things are really dark, Ella Emerson's point, is there anything I can do about it? If yes, what? What are my skills and talents that God gave me to be able to improve the world around me? Yeah, I can lead, I can teach, I can educate, I can talk about it, I can build a map. And so for me, that's what that looks like.
Okay, thank you. Emerson?
Great. Just to start, I just want to say thank you to Perry for hosting all of these. It's been incredible over the last number of months and truly inspirational, and has been something I really look forward to every Thursday at 6:30 Eastern time. It's been just a fantastic use of time, and thank you to everybody on the panel. I look forward to keeping in touch with all of you and to everybody that's been a part of this in terms of listening and asking questions. And it's all been good faith and very thought provoking. All the way down to the American, China, etc. conversations on the side. It's just a fantastic group overall. So that's my first thought. In terms of leadership, I think it's I come away from this hopeful when it comes to 5, 10 plus years from now in terms of a desire for change in the country, and I think my own role will just be being one of the people that is contributing to that. With I hope a lot of people that want change. Not in a partisan political way, just wanting better, faster, more effective government and private sector. So that's my sort of overarching thought. And then what I'm doing going forward is being on the investing side with an American company that's investing into deep tech and critical minerals. And that's partly American, partly Israeli, partly based out of Montreal. So I will try to put my money where my mouth is in terms of investing on this, and hopefully some of the projects can be in Canada when it comes to being able to build things. But again, thank you, Perry. It's been fantastic, and I will miss these sessions.
I'll say thank you to at the wrap up, but we've got one more question after this one. I'll come back to that in a moment. But Vivek, let's go next, and then we'll ask Michael.
Yeah, no, I would just want to say, Perry, that these sessions have been great, although I've had to wake up at 4 a.m. to attend them since I'm not currently in Canada. But I do think that these sessions have been great in fostering debate and talking about different ideas. I think that one of the great things about these sessions is that they can be a prototype for the model of what can come next in engaging the youth populations. Like I'm already, I don't know if you told anybody else, but I told you the other day that I heard from the Premier's office that the Premier is interested in assembling a youth advisory of her own. So it's definitely something that is growing in popularity these days, engaging the youth. And I think it's important because we are the next generation of leaders. The current generation of leaders will eventually come to an end. And I think that preparing the next generation early on is important, and hearing the ideas can excel, especially in this great time of change as that we are in, compared to any other time that we've been in. I think it's important to engage the youth more than ever because the change is more rapid in pace, and it's a lot more different than whatever we have faced in the past 50 years, I'd like to say. So I think that this is a good model for what's coming, the prototype for what we need.
Thank you, Vivek. And I know we've got some work to do together as we shape that future. By the way, did Donna Kennedy Glans reach out to you?
Yes, I'm actually meeting her when I come back.
Excellent. Okay. You got the wrap-up role, Michael. Your perspective on what role you feel you might be playing in leadership.
hmm Yeah, I'm approaching change by leading it, especially for Indigenous peoples and, Indigenous peoples in Alberta specifically. But I'm leading in a way that's grounded in humility, community, and culture. Change is always constant, and for Indigenous peoples, we've had to adapt for generations, and most of the time it was to survive. But now, we have an opportunity to lead change on our own terms with our values at the forefront, which is, really important now more than ever. In my role as a clean energy manager in my community, I don't just adapt to new technologies, I bring these technologies into our community in ways that reflect our vision, whether it's designing a solar project or planning sustainable infrastructure. I always ask things like, does this reflect our values? Does it empower our youth? Does it make our nation stronger? And how will this affect the next 7 generations when I am not here? And I'm also deeply committed to mentorship, because leading change isn't just about what I do, it's about who I support along the way and who supports me along the way. I definitely wouldn't be here without all the support and the mentorship I've gotten in these past few years, especially in the clean energy space. Leadership, means creating space for others, especially young people, to step into their power and shape the future to the way that, is for the good of all the people. And I want to leave a legacy where clean energy and culture pride go hand in hand, and where every Indigenous youth knows and every Canadian youth knows that they have a place in building what comes next in Canada.
Thank you. Clean energy and culture change. That's alliteration on C. I like that. I'm going to give you guys the last word. Emerson, I appreciate it. Rachel, each of you for your complimentary comments. But this is a chance for me to ask you very briefly, because we've only got a few minutes here. What is your takeaway from this experience? What have you gotten out of the last 7 weeks? This was meant not just for us. It was meant to be a developmental experience for yourself. So if you'll share with me and the audience briefly, what did you get out of this session? And I'm going to start with you, Vivek. I'll work backwards.
Sorry, could you repeat the question there a little bit?
What is the takeaway? What did you get out of the experience of the last 7 weeks? What did you learn?
Yeah, I think that I learned a lot of things. I've heard a lot of great things from people like Rachel and Emerson, everybody else who was here, and they brought in different perspectives that than what I have from my experience being limited to whatever my age is, and plus my friends and everything that I read on the internet. So I think that having those different perspectives of some people who've worked in different places has broadened my perspective a little bit more. Like Emerson's greater geopolitical analysis, while I'm also pretty interested in that as well, I think that that added a lot to my perspective too, because it's more in depth than what I possess. And I'd say, yeah, I'd say that there's a great deal of different perspective that we learned here. And I would say that that broadening of my perspective is one of my greatest takeaways here.
Okay, thank you, Rachel.
Um, I think, yeah, Vivek makes a great point in that hearing from people across the spectrum, in terms of the youth spectrum, in terms of different industries, has been really, really enlightening. Um, love hearing Marty's perspective uh, on energy and indigenous influence. That was great, very eye opening, and I love your willingness to come to the table and participate like so enthusiastically and share so much about this conversations. Also loved Emerson's really specific governmental points. Those were really interesting to hear about. Um, I think the biggest takeaway for me though is that this is a group of people who could come together, like this spread of people could come together to agree on certain points, vote similarly on certain points, um, for the good of Canada. Unlike in a lot of past generations, just because people have differences or, you might have various differences, it seems like everybody is willing to look at the most important issues and would rank them quite similarly and would move the country forward in a very similar way. So that's been really nice to see a certain amount of unity, a certain amount of identification of the same kind of problems, a certain amount of optimism and shared understanding of each other makes me feel much more positive about the potential direction, even if it is in 5 to 10 years.
I just want to echo kind of what everyone has been saying, and it's really thankful for you, Perry, and for everyone on the panel, and for everything that I've gotten from this, especially in terms of just listening and learning. I'm really, really honored to be able to be here at the table and be on the panel and speak. But I'll kind of go into a little bit of what I've got from this experience. You know, this experience has reminded me how important it is for Indigenous youth to be seen and heard, not just within our communities, but in national conversations about Canada's future. I've learned that our stories, our struggles, and our solutions matter, and that we bring a unique and necessary perspective to leadership and innovation that needs to be continued to be explored. Being part of this panel has reaffirmed my belief that, you know, we can build bridges between cultures, generations, and systems. I've learned a lot from the other panelists and have seen how diverse our experiences are, which was, you know, really great. But also how connected we are in our hopes for a better future, which is, you know, why we're all here. And I think, you know, my biggest takeaway is that leadership is not about having all the answers. It's about listening, showing up, and, you know, staying rooted in your values. I have a little quote here that I really like to go by, and that is, you know, it's not about being the smartest person in the room. It's about surrounding yourself with the smartest people. And as a young Cree change maker, I'm proud to carry forward the teachings of my people, and I hope that others are inspired to do the same in their own way. So thank you so much for having me here. I really appreciate it.
Well, on behalf of, I think, the entire audience, so thank you, Michael, for your input. Emerson, you got the last word.
Well, again, thank you for everything, and jumped the gun slightly last time. I would go back to a word that Rachel used, unity. There's a lot of different perspectives on this call. And then what Michael just said on connection. I've come away really heartened that there are young people from many different backgrounds that are super pragmatic and are putting pragmatism before anything that is, you know, quote unquote woke. My perception coming into this is young people are pretty interested in social issues more than the economy, but that view has been completely reversed. I really hope that this is the case in the broader world, and this isn't just a, you know, small subset of people that actually at their core share similar values. But I don't think it is. I think young people are pretty pragmatic, and again want real things to happen in the country, and are going to be very discerning about that going forward. So I come away super hopeful in that sense.
Well, you each obviously have mentors behind you because there have been people that recommended you for this series, and I think you may want to thank them. And I want to wrap the series up by thanking each of you, Emerson, Rachel, Michael, Vivek, Natalie, who isn't here today, and Sophia. It's been extraordinary. It exceeded my expectations. The feedback I've gotten from the audience, and I'm sure from this session as well, will be equally complimentary. So I look forward to working with you each again in the future in some capacity. Michael, I hope you've had your interview. Rachel, in the next series. Emerson, you and I need to have a conversation. And Vivek, we've got a project going forward. So I've capitalized on this relationship with each of you. So with that, I'm going to say good night.